routine, so that the commanders are getting tested and do it on the ground, and equally for us to learn and get used to the incorporation of modern technology.
This is Operation Interflex, the training of Ukraine's armed forces in the United Kingdom. We've come to a base in the east of England where Ukrainian troops are rehearsing storming a trench. They're being backed by drones which are dropping water bombs, water balloons to simulate the grenades that would be dropped on positions during this sort of offence. You can see there's a lot of smoke around me. The troops are coming through in waves from these tree lines and storming what is a very sort of well-dug, zigzag-shaped trench in front of them. So clearly they're trying to make this sort of training as realistic as possible. And what we've just seen is soldiers playing the enemy, playing the Russians. They're wearing different types of camouflage, different uniforms to simulate what the Russians do. They are wearing white tape around their helmets and their arms, again, try and make it as realistic as possible. And we've seen both sides lobbing grenades, smoke grenades at each other. Again, obviously in a real conflict scenario, those would be fragmentation, deadly explosive fragmentation grenades as well. But this training has evolved since it was launched as a British attempt to try and help bolster Ukraine's armed forces, and it's all about trying to give Ukraine soldiers the edge, the skills they need to fight in the conditions which they will face within days of leaving Britain and going back to Ukraine. And it's not just trench warfare that they're learning here. There are medical courses, there are fighting in built-up area courses, all sorts of training sets. As I say again, all about trying to get Ukraine's forces ready for the fight that they will face in a situation not unlike this when they go back to defend their homeland. So these are the trenches. They're pretty, like you see, they're really well built. And you know, I've seen trenches in Ukraine that are like this, and I've seen trenches in Ukraine that are much more hastily built. But as the front lines have stagnated over the last year and a half, really, perhaps longer, you know, it has become this attritional conflict. It has become, in many ways, so reminiscent of fights like World War I, where soldiers are storming from tree lines across open ground to dug in positions like this. We've seen it in the countryside right across northeastern and indeed southern Ukraine. We've seen it in the Donbass, we've seen it in Kharkiv, Kupiansk, we're seeing it now in Pokrovsk. It's made it in many ways harder for both sides to use their armour. Indeed, one of the things that Ukrainian soldiers, the last time I spoke to them, have told me is that they're seeing a change in Russian tactics. Russians appear to be using sort of small groups, 4 to 6 soldiers to probe positions. All of those sorts of lessons we understand are being fed into this training here as part of Interflex.
Поворот направо! Поворот направо! Поворот направо! Рух! Рух! Стоп! Стоп! Рух, 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 Никита, рух! Прямо я наліво! За 200! Ой, push back! Ренат, затікай! Ой! Hold it, hold it. Ренат! Ренат йде! Пошов, пошов!
A lot of the arguments, the debate we hear in the international community and the media is about what weapons Ukraine is being given. There's a lot of discussion about Storm Shadow, about ATACMS missiles, but fundamentally the resource that Ukraine needs more than anything at the moment is soldiers on the front line. In the last 1,000 days of this conflict, both sides have suffered very heavy casualty rates. The latest British estimate is that Russia has lost some 700,000 soldiers dead and injured. Now that is an average of 1,000 soldiers a day, not all killed but dead and wounded. And in the last month, in November, we understand the average casualty rate has in fact doubled to around 1,500 a day. And whilst Ukraine's casualties have been lower, they've nonetheless been significant. And that's why training like this is so important, to try and allow Ukraine to replenish its armed forces. These soldiers are having the luxury, in one sense, of being able to train in safety. If they train in Ukraine, then of course any concentration of troops is at risk of being attacked. Of course, there's a real sense of poignancy because these men who are training here are the ones who may not grow old. These are the ones who are fighting, or who will be fighting, on Europe's front line against Russia's war of aggression, fundamentally to protect not just Ukraine and their homes and their families, but they're protecting all of Europe, and I think they're protecting the world as we know it.
Well, the situation in Ukraine is serious, but the idea that Putin would stop with Ukraine if he won there is also serious. He would continue threatening the West, he would continue threatening the United Kingdom. That's why our support for Ukraine is long-lasting. That's why we've said clearly that we'll support them for as long as it takes. That's the provision of military equipment, hardware and training, and we're going to continue to do that. But Putin could stop this war, and he could stop it today if he wanted to.
Дуже дякую, що приєдналися до війська. Це дуже і дуже мужній поступок. Україна у нас одна. Ніхто, крім нас, захищати її не буде. Пам'ятайте, що війна з кожним днем становиться все жорстокіше. Вона майже не залишає шансів вижити. Але все ж таки війна буде боятися того, хто готовий до неї приєднатися. Потрібно тут цьому вчитися. Вчитися не боятися смерті, не боятися дивитися ворогу в очі. Це дуже і дуже важливо. Ви маєте тут навчитися, перш за все, берегти себе. Навчитися тут вижити. Друге, дивіться уважно один одному в очі. Запам'ятовуйте один одного. Ви маєте один одного запам'ятати на все життя. І переживати, де він товариш, де Василь, де Петро, що з ним, чи живий він. І на полі бою дивитися на такого ж самого товариша і намагатися врятувати його. Будь-що. Зберегти свого товариша, наскільки це буде можливо. Але цього ще мало. Мало зберегти себе і мало зберегти свого друга, свого побратима. Потрібно ще обов'язково виконати завдання. Для цього потрібно буде вбивати. Вбивати не задумуючись, бачачи ворога, вбити його першим, ніж він спробує вбити тебе або твого товариша. Вчіться цьому, будь ласка, тут. Любіть один одного і пам'ятайте про Україну. Якщо вас не стане, можливо, ваше місце замінить хтось інший. Але Україна має бути збережена. Наші діти, наші жінки, наші батьки мають жити у мирі, чого б нам це не коштувало. Україна у нас одна. І ми обов'язково переможемо. Разом. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!